Dr. Phil opened an envelope, and the studio froze. No one breathed. The cameras kept rolling, but inside that room, time stopped. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the aged, yellowed paper. The woman sitting across from him covered her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. The audience sat motionless, their collective breath held in anticipation. And then, Dr. Phil did something he rarely does. He looked directly at the camera operator and said two words that changed everything. "Stop rolling." What was written on that letter? Why did it have the power to halt one of television's most tightly controlled productions? And how did a piece of paper, hidden for over 2 decades, become the key to unlocking a family's deepest pain? This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a 42-year-old mother of 3 who came to Dr. Phil not because she wanted to, but because she felt she had no choice left. Her family was fractured. Her marriage was hanging by a thread. And buried in a shoebox in her closet was a letter she had carried for 23 years, a letter she had never opened, a letter that held the truth she had been running from her entire adult life. If you want to understand what happened next, subscribe now, because what Dr. Phil uncovered in the next hour would become one of the most powerful moments in the show's history. 3 weeks before Sarah walked onto that stage, she was sitting in her kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at a bottle of pills. Not because she wanted to harm herself, but because she didn't know how else to silence the voice in her head that told her she was a failure. Her husband, Mark, had stopped talking to her months ago. Her teenage daughter, Emma, refused to come out of her room. And her 2 younger sons acted as if she didn't exist. The family therapist they'd been seeing had run out of answers. That's when Mark made the call to Dr. Phil's producers. "My wife is drowning," he told them. "And I don't know how to save her." But what no one knew, not even Mark, was that Sarah had been drowning long before they ever met. She had been drowning since the day her mother handed her that envelope and said, "Read this when you're ready to know the truth." Sarah was 19. She wasn't ready. So she never opened it. The Dr. Phil stage is deceptively simple. 2 chairs. A small table. Bright lights. An audience of strangers who came to witness someone else's pain and maybe their redemption. Sarah walked onto that stage with the envelope tucked inside her purse. She hadn't told the producers about it. She hadn't told Mark. She wasn't even sure why she brought it. But something deep inside her knew that if she was going to face her demons, she needed to bring the source. Dr. Phil greeted her with his signature directness. "Sarah, your husband says you've checked out of your own life. Is that true?" She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to be what they need me to be." "What do they need you to be?" "Present. Strong. A mother who has it together." Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. "But I'm not that person. I've never been that person." Dr. Phil leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with the intensity of someone who has heard thousands of stories but treats each one as if it's the only one that matters. "Sarah, what are you hiding?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The audience shifted in their seats. Sarah's breath caught. And then, almost involuntarily, her hand reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope. "This," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been hiding this." Dr. Phil looked at the envelope. Even from a distance, he could see how old it was. The paper was discolored, the edges frayed. Handwriting in faded ink across the front. "To Sarah. When you're ready." "What is that?" Dr. Phil asked gently. "A letter. From my mother. She gave it to me the day before she died. 23 years ago. I never opened it." The studio went silent. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights. The cameras zoomed in on Sarah's face, tears now streaming freely. Dr. Phil didn't move. He let the silence do its work. And then he asked the question that every person in that room, and everyone watching at home, was thinking. "Why didn't you open it?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Because I was afraid of what it would say." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil reached out his hand. "May I?" Sarah hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the envelope as if it were radioactive. For 23 years she had carried this letter like a curse. It had lived in shoeboxes, in drawers, in the back of closets. It had moved with her through 5 different homes, 2 states, and an entire life built on avoidance. And now, in front of millions of viewers, she was about to let someone else hold the secret she had protected for more than 2 decades. She handed it to him. Dr. Phil held the envelope with reverence, as if he understood the weight it carried. He looked at Sarah, then at the audience, and then back at the letter. His thumb traced the edge of the sealed flap. "Sarah, do you want me to open this?" Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know. Let me ask you something," Dr. Phil said, his tone shifting into the one he uses when he's about to cut through the noise and get to the core. "What do you think is in here that's so terrifying you've spent 23 years running from it?" Sarah's hands shook. "The truth." "The truth about what?" "About why she gave me up." The room froze. The audience gasped softly. Even the production crew, accustomed to emotional breakthroughs, felt the shift. This wasn't just a family drama. This was the unraveling of a lifetime of pain. Dr. Phil set the envelope down on the small table between them. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Tell me about your mother." Sarah took a shaky breath. She was complicated. Beautiful. Smart. But distant. I always felt like I was in the way. Like she resented me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When I was 7, she sent me to live with my grandmother. She said it was temporary. It wasn't. I stayed there until I was 17. And then, 2 years later, she got sick. Cancer. Stage 4. She called me to come see her. I went. And the day before she died, she handed me that envelope. What did she say when she gave it to you? She said, "Read this when you're ready to forgive me." Sarah's tears fell harder now. I told her I already forgave her. But I was lying. I was angry. I was so angry. And then she died, and I never got to tell her the truth. Dr. Phil nodded slowly. And you've been carrying that anger ever since? Yes. And now it's destroying your life. Sarah broke. Full, body-shaking sobs. The kind that come from a place so deep, they feel like they might never stop. The audience wiped their eyes. Some reached for tissues. Others just sat in the silence, bearing witness. Dr. Phil waited. He didn't rush her. He didn't try to fix it. He just let her feel it. And then, when the sobs slowed, he picked up the envelope again. Sarah, I'm going to tell you something. Whatever is in this letter, it's not going to hurt you any more than the fear of it already has. You've been carrying this weight for 23 years. It's time to put it down. She nodded, her face red and wet with tears. Do you want me to read it? She looked at him, then at the envelope, and then whispered, Yes. Dr. Phil carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside was just as old, just as fragile. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the handwritten words. And as he read, his expression changed. The trademark Dr. Phil poker face cracked. His jaw tightened. His eyes welled up. He looked up at Sarah. Hold on, he said. Then, louder, directed at the production booth. Stop the tape. The cameras didn't stop immediately. There was confusion. Dr. Phil never stops the tape. But he stood up, walked over to the edge of the stage, and repeated it. I said stop the cameras. Now. The red recording lights went dark. The audience sat in stunned silence. Sarah looked panicked. What was in the letter? Why did Dr. Phil stop the show? He walked back to his chair, sat down, and leaned in close to Sarah. His voice was low, but the microphone still caught it. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything. Are you ready? She nodded, trembling. Dr. Phil took a breath. Your mother didn't give you up because she didn't love you. She gave you up because she was protecting you. Sarah's face twisted in confusion. Protecting me? From what? Dr. Phil held up the letter. From your father. Sarah, your mother was being abused. Severely. And she knew that if she kept you in that house, he would hurt you too. So she made the hardest decision any mother could make. She sent you to your grandmother, where you'd be safe. And she stayed. She stayed and endured it, so you wouldn't have to. The air left the room. Sarah's hands flew to her face. A sound escaped her throat that wasn't quite a scream, wasn't quite a sob. It was something more primal. Something that had been locked inside her for 23 years. Dr. Phil continued, his voice thick with emotion. She writes that she wanted to tell you, but she was ashamed. She thought you'd hate her for being weak. For not leaving him. She thought you'd blame her. So she wrote this letter, and she asked you to read it when you were ready to forgive her. Not for leaving you, but for staying. Sarah couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. All she could do was cry. But this time, it was different. This wasn't the cry of anger or resentment. It was the cry of release. Of understanding. Of grief for the mother she never really knew. Dr. Phil reached out and took her hand. Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. And she spent every day of her life sacrificing herself so you could be free. The audience was in tears. Grown men wiped their faces. Women clutched tissues. Even the crew members, hardened by years of emotional television, were visibly moved. Dr. Phil looked directly at Sarah. You didn't fail your mother. She didn't fail you. You both did the best you could with what you had. And now, it's time to stop punishing yourself for something that was never your fault. Sarah nodded, unable to form words. And it's time, Dr. Phil said, to go home and be the mother you've always been capable of being. Not perfect. Not without scars. But present. And that's all your family needs. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The cameras didn't turn back on for another 20 minutes. Dr. Phil took Sarah backstage, away from the audience, and connected her with a trauma therapist from his team. He arranged for her and Mark to attend intensive family counseling. He made sure Emma and the boys had access to support resources. And he did something he almost never does. He followed up personally, calling Sarah every week for the next 3 months. 6 months later, Sarah sent Dr. Phil a letter of her own. In it she wrote, You didn't just help me open an envelope. You helped me open my life. My family is healing. My daughter talks to me again. My sons hug me. And my husband looks at me the way he did when we first met. But more than that, I finally understand my mother. And I've forgiven her. And myself. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened in that studio rippled far beyond Sarah's family. Within 48 hours of the episode airing, Dr. Phil's office received over 12,000 emails. People from every corner of the world writing to say they had their own unopened envelopes. Their own hidden truths. Their own mothers, fathers, siblings, children they had been too afraid to face. One woman wrote that she had been carrying her father's suicide note for 15 years, never reading it because she blamed herself. After watching Sarah's story, she finally opened it. Inside, her father had written that his depression had nothing to do with her, that she was the only light in his dark world, and that he was sorry he couldn't stay to see her grow up. She wept. But for the first time in 15 years, she wept without guilt. Another viewer shared that her estranged sister had sent her a letter before passing away from cancer. She kept it sealed out of anger, convinced it would be full of blame. Inspired by Sarah, she opened it. Her sister had written only 4 words. I always loved you. They were reconciled, even in death. Dr. Phil doesn't talk about these stories often. But he keeps a folder in his desk labeled, The Envelope Effect. It's filled with letters from people who found the courage to face their own hidden truths because one woman on his show decided to stop running. Sarah's mother's letter now sits framed in Sarah's home. Not hidden in a shoebox. Not buried in a closet. It hangs in her bedroom, where she reads it every morning. A reminder that love sometimes looks like sacrifice. That strength sometimes looks like surrender. And that the people who hurt us are often the ones who loved us most, doing the best they could with the pain they carried. Dr. Phil keeps Sarah's letter in his office. Not on display. Just in a drawer. A reminder that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is help someone face the truth they've been running from. Because healing doesn't come from avoiding the pain. It comes from walking straight into it, opening the envelope, and reading the words you've been too afraid to see. And sometimes, those words change everything. Not just for one person, but for thousands. Maybe even millions. That's the power of truth. And that's why Dr. Phil will never stop asking the hard questions.